Vindaswarup Prabhu was the opposite. He won't go on to the next sentence until the first sentence is exactly the way he wants it. Which makes his writing wonderful, but it also makes it torture for him to write. Because you have to struggle with each bit as it's going on. So I'm not going to be prescriptive because you do what suits you, but I will observe that there are two different functions. The creative sort of function and the critical function. If you can do both at the same time, we all do both at the same time. But if you can do both at the same time, and you want to, fine. Otherwise, as a writer, you may find it easier just to hold your critical sense back until later, knowing that you can revisit it. Yes?
When I was reading your book, I wondered, was it hard for you to change gears from editor to writer in that sense, with Amanda-Vikrama?
No. I don't think explicitly. I mean, one thing I did with Vanity Karma is I wrote using Microsoft Word's outline feature. Everyone know about Microsoft Word's outline feature? Everyone uses Microsoft Word, right? Okay. It has an outline feature, which I guess we'll demonstrate because that's the easiest way to do it. Yours? Okay, I have to try this. Okay, this is a good example, ready-made. This is if you go to bottom of Microsoft Word, on the lower right-hand side, there are different layouts that you can have. And one is like web layout, how your text is going to look on the web. This is a bad example, but if I had an example, it reflows it so that it all fits on the page as it would on a website. And then you have your typical draft way of looking at things. But then, maybe I'll start a new document. And where am I stuck? Is my cursor? No.
Control N is a shortcut.
I know, that's what I did. I didn't like it. Because I'm running this, I'm not running Windows, I'm running Windows in a virtual session. So it's behaving strange. But, okay, this is a BBT style guide. And if I blow it up, you'll see that's ordinary draft form. Now if I go down to here, that's the web view. It just flows it all so it fits on the screen. But then there's a third one called outline view. Now, okay, this is not really a document I wrote an outline. But if you see that heading, and if I double click on this, everything under it disappears.
Wow.
And I can go to the outlining page and say how many levels I want to show. Let's say I want to show level books. Too many spelling. That's okay. Fix my spelling. Let's say I want to show one level. Well, let's show 2 levels, because again, this wasn't done as an outline. Okay, there you see what we're talking about. Each of these headings is now collapsed. So I can see the whole batch of them all at once. But if I want to see what's underneath, there's what's in there. Or, yeah, most of this is short.
So anything bulleted can be condensed like that? So anything that's bulleted can be condensed?
Anything that's bulleted, now see, there I've got like 5 paragraphs, but they're all underneath that.
Wow.
Now that's a document that I didn't use outline mode to write. I'm just using it as a demonstration. But let's take it out, one that I actually wrote as an outline, or I am writing as an outline. This is a BBT handbook, which is in the process of being written. And when you see it in outline mode, these are really all I've done. It's sort of in this document, because I haven't gotten very far, is decide what I want to have in the book. Hold on a second. Oh, I see. Show level 1. Here's essentially the table of contents for my book. Preface, overview, corporate ethos, editorial, books by Srila Prabhupada, design and illustration, production, printing, marketing, warehousing, non-print media, follow-up personnel, education and training, and so on. Each one's like a chapter. Now let's go to editorial. And let's say I'm going to expand everything. That was 1. Now let's show 2 levels. So, corporate ethos. So now you see what's underneath it. The duties of the trustee, BBT should benefit stakeholders, ecological responsibility, public reporting, conflict of interest. Now each one of these, if I go to show 3 levels, each one of those has something under it. The duties of a trustee. Trust law prescribes that for a trustee, these principal duties. And if I expand to level 4, you'll see what those duties are. And I have text under each one. So this gives you enormous flexibility in terms of something for thinking. Thinking to organizing your thoughts. It's really, really useful. One of the reasons it's useful is you can just write a paragraph and later say, click, and out it goes. Or click, I'm moving it from here to there. Well, 2 to a page. So, okay. 4 to a page would have been. Why so many to each page, Prabhu? So much paper.
Yeah, so many slides are there. 53 slides are there.
You have to tell it how many slides you want on a page. Anyway. So you know that I can move this to another chapter, I can move it to the beginning of the section, I can move this here, I can move this there, I can delete it, put it in my scrap section at the bottom. Everything here and everything under it I can move, or whatever I want. So it's very agile. And you may find that for certain kinds of writing, it's really helpful. Obviously, you're writing poetry, you're probably not going to use outline. But for some things, it's really, I wrote the whole book that way.
Wow, okay.
Especially, it really lends itself to that because text, you know, I'm commenting on a particular text, verses 1 through 3. So my top level is verses 1 through 3, the actual text. Then underneath that, what I'm going to say about this, underneath that, what I'm going to say about that, and I can fill in, I can, you know.
Like, as an example, maybe like a story from your childhood, you could move it to a particular...
You move it from here to there.
Here to there, that's so wonderful.
It's a tool,
Yeah.
and it's a pretty good one. Okay. How did we get onto that? Oh, we're talking about being able to just later on say, okay, as a writer, I write and I write and I write, and then I come back as an editor and say, okay, this paragraph's out. You know, you could write things like, okay, I have to start writing about this, I better get going. Okay, I'm going to keep my pen moving, and you know, I think this about this, and I think about that, and you know, by after maybe 10 minutes, you might start actually writing something that starts to catch. You know, your intelligence catches, because you need to get that juice flowing, you need to get some process moving. So knowing that later on you can throw out anywhere from 1 to 98%, 99.9% of what you wrote is liberating. I can go back later. So a critical function and a free-flowing creative function. Any questions?
That's great.
While it comes to mind, no, I'm not even going to talk.
Does this outline mode, I guess, I mean, when an editor, they would go into draft mode and then start track changes and stuff like that?
It got a little finicky on me. There were some things that didn't come across exactly right,
Yeah.
but adjusting it was a lot easier than writing without it.
Right. Oh, no, sorry.
Or adjusting the quirks was easier than writing without outline. Okay. Who are you serving? Of course, yes, Krishna, spiritual master. But as an editor, first you have the author to serve, which means trying to present what the author wants to present in the author's own voice, so it sounds like the author, not like the editor, with preserving the very best of the author, making sure there's clarity, making sure that he comes off at his best, making sure that his facts are checked, that his arguments are straight, that the language is grammatical, and so on. So you're serving your author. Then you have a publisher to serve. They have certain standards that they want met. There may be economic goals involved. The Macmillan Company wanted Prabhupada's book to be 400 pages. So the editors had to chop, 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 because that was an editorial or a publisher's requirement. There were all sorts of, the publisher has a goal. He wants to make money, or he wants to get across a message. His publication has a certain mood and a certain image and a certain purpose. So all of that comes into play. Certain space requirements, certain financial requirements. So you're serving your publisher. And finally, who's going to be finally? The reader. Thank you, the reader. You're serving your reader. And we talked about that. The reader doesn't want to be tripping up and stumbling and wandering about in confusion because the text has not been presented the way it should have been. He doesn't want to be doing the editor's work for him, or for himself, rather. So you have to serve these three. Simple. This is a nice section. There's a book which you all have to get called The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. It's, in this incarnation, roughly 95 pages. That's because they packed it with a batch of junk up front. No, it's actually 90. They didn't number those pages. Okay, so it's about 95 little pages, and it gives you the basics of what you want to know to write in English. And basically, anyone who writes anything in English needs this book. It's classic, it's widely available. You can pick them up secondhand on Amazon for a couple bucks. Doesn't matter whether it's the second edition, third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition. They keep coming out with different editions so they can say it's new, but it's actually the same book. So within the short space, you're going to find a lot, and you can read it and reread it. If this were a course where you had to buy books, you'd have to buy that one. There's only one book you have to buy, and that's mine. If you'd like a sample of a well-edited and so on and so on. I do have copies.
It's very nice.
I won't do quite the pitch that Irma and Monty gave this morning, but you can't get it. Okay, this is from Strunk and White. Will, that is William Strunk, his professor at Cornell, felt that the reader was in serious trouble most of the time, a man floundering in a swamp, and that it was the duty of anyone attempting to write English to drain this swamp quickly and get his man up on dry ground, or at least throw him a rope. So that's the service to the reader. Get him up on dry ground, at least throw him a rope. Yes. Then we come in particular to Vaishnava editors. Hence this course. This is something you will not get in your university course. We charge extra for this. Yeah.
Among the three people whom you're trying to serve, is there any priority that you have to keep in mind?
Pardon me?
Is there any priority?
Is there a priority among whom you have to serve? It depends. If you're editing for your Guru Maharaj, you better serve the author first. If you're editing for a publisher, the publisher may, who's giving you a paycheck? If it's the publisher, you're not going to kowtow to the author. You're going to say, but the publisher insists on, the publisher wants, what my publisher is looking for, and so on. We recently dealt with an article in the New York Times, and the author wrote it one way, and she gave it to her editor, and the editor said, no, yes, but we want an article. The whole thing was recast in a different, what would you say, a different dress, because the editor wanted something. So it really depends on who's paying the bills. But in any case, you're going to want to serve the reader. That's in any case. But whether it's the publisher, the writer, or a combination of both, that we'll see. Case to case. Anything else here? Okay. I've got myself 2 outlines to look at. Yeah, I see. Now I see the difference between this and this. When you're serving the publisher, you want to keep a high standard for his publications, help him reach his audience, help him meet his financial goals. From the author, you want to keep his message, his voice, keep him going in a straight line, keep him writing. We talked about that, encouraging your author. And by the way, even if you reject someone's writing, say, we can't use it, you can still encourage them that it was good and come back later, or maybe you want to submit to another publication because this is really good. We may not use it for BTG, but we might try this one or that one. You're always looking to encourage. the devotees that you're working with. For the reader, you want to help him find what he's looking for, or help him understand what's being said, help enlighten and uplift him, or help make his reading a pleasure. Okay, now, qualifications for Vaishnava editors. What do you think?
Strict sadhana?
Strict sadhana, yes. Thank you very much. They should have strong sadachara, because if you're not strong in your sadhana, you're weak as a Vaishnava. So you want strong sadhana. What else?
Know the philosophy.
Know the philosophy. Thank you very much. Prabhupada was talking to the BTG editors. He said, we have got some siddhanta, some conclusions. And the editors have to know those conclusions. If you don't know the siddhanta, how can you edit Vaishnava literature? And the third one, which you're not going to guess, is that you should be scrutinizing. That was the word that Prabhupada used. He said the editors should be scrutinizing. Which again is that critical function. Editors are like gatekeepers, nothing unwanted should get in. Any question about this? Straightforward again. All this stuff to joke. Yes. I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluating them. I was having two of these on the table. Having two of these. Evaluation. We talked about this a little bit before. One of the things that you do is evaluate what comes across your desk. You're looking critically at it, and also looking at what it could be, what potential it has. Asking, is what's being said worth saying? Is it worth it? Is there anything in this? Is it fluff? Is it just so light that there's nothing here to grab onto, or nothing that suits our purposes anyway? Does the author know what they're talking about? There are a lot of bluffers out there, folks. People who pretend to know, but don't really know. Or people who sort of, what's the word, wing it? They just kind of on the fly drop a comment about, according to string theory, according to modern psychology, according to this, and whatever they throw out there is just rubbish. They don't really know what they're talking about. They worked in a lecture and no one challenged them, so they've been doing it ever since. So does the author really know what they're talking about? If I write an article about children's education, chances are that I don't know what I'm talking about. If Ursula writes about that, she's an authority. If I write about that, I'm a speculator. Is the person qualified? Editors at big publishing houses who commission writers to do this or that work, they look, if I'm doing a book on psychology, I want someone with a graduate degree in psychology from the University of such and such. I'm not looking for a painter or an artist. But if I'm doing a book about art history, I'm looking for an art historian. So does the person know what they're talking about? Sometimes even experts don't, but that's another story. You want to ask yourself as you read, is it true? Is it philosophically correct? Is it in line with Shastra? And are statements about material reality real? Are they straight? I wrote an article one time in which I mentioned the retractable dome of some stadium in America, and later found out that it's not retractable. Ouch, yeah, I didn't have an editor. But that's what your editors do. They check on your material reality. Is Johannesburg really the capital of South Africa? Well, to tell you the truth, it's not. And even Pretoria is not exactly the capital of South Africa, because South Africa has, what, 3 capitals, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So these are the sort of things that, as an editor, you want to not just assume the author knows, but check.
Gotcha.
Does this writing have an audience? Or is the author, should he really just like kind of keep it, write it and be happy that he's written it? And does it fit its audience? If it's a book for children, is it in children's language? Is it suitable subject matter for children? Are there topics that are too confidential? For Back to Godhead, there were topics that Prabhupada didn't want us to publish. Why Krishna and the gopis? This is not meant for Back to Godhead. Prabhupada said we had 3 stages. The first stage brings someone to the importance of self-realization, to understand to wake him up, essentially. Then the next stage is dealings with Krishna, Radha Krishna Lila, that. He said, and third stage is always absorbed in thinking of Krishna. He said, so we're writing on the first stage. To wake someone up, actually he said the second stage in this one is to train someone. Wake him up, and then when he comes forward and says, please initiate me, please train me, then instruction. So BTG is meant for those first 2 stages, to awaken someone and train him. So the Radha Krishna Lila, that belongs to the 3rd stage. So for Back to Godhead, that's out. You will find there's lots of articles about Rasa Lila and all that, because that's not the purpose. So you want to avoid topics that are inappropriate for your audience. You may want to avoid needless offense. Well, you do want to avoid purposeful controversy. You might want to foster that. In fact, controversy, from a publisher's point of view, controversy sells. From another point of view, from the reader's point of view, controversy attracts. So we may not want at all to shy away from controversy. Controversy helps get us going. But needless controversy, pointless controversy, or offensive controversy. You want to look at the level of discourse. For a learned audience, it should be more formal. For a general audience, it can be more laid back, more informal. The level of the language, again, for a specialist audience, you don't mind using special terms. Like for this kind of audience, you can use all sorts of jargon. You can talk about greeting the deities, you can talk about Buddha, you can talk about Panchakalpas, you can talk about all this kind of stuff, and assume that people know what you mean. But for an outside audience, if you talk about, and we met and exchanged Panchakalpas, what? And greeting the deities is like, hi, deities. So, is your language appropriate for the audience, both in terms of its formality and informality, technicality, or broad intelligibility?
I feel, maybe it's in my mind, but I feel like that point gets a little bit sensitive. Because say, for example, online you're going to put an event art, and say someone else
Online you're going to put
an event art, like an invitation,
an event.
and someone else writes it, and they're like, Hare Krishna, Pamo, all the things, and all the jargon that you want to remove out, and make it very casual so that someone that's very new will understand. I feel like it's a sensitive topic because I don't know why I feel like it's a sensitive topic, because you're removing jargon and then you're removing... Am I making sense? Am I being very articulate?
I think I can sort it out.
If it's not clear, then...
Certain audiences expect jargon.
Yeah.
The devotees, you create a familiarity and a camaraderie or intimacy with devotees when you talk about greeting the deities, when you talk about Guru Puja, when you talk about Guru Maharajas and all that kind of stuff. Everybody knows what you mean, and everybody, if you started formalizing it or unpacking it to make it more clear to a general audience, they'd miss you. They'd say, who's she talking to?
Yeah.
Like, doesn't she think I don't know what greeting the deities is? And sometimes we find that, something written for an inside audience that's explaining the terms that the inside audience is totally familiar with. Or like if I were writing for an audience of textual scholars and I talked about lithography, they'll all understand what I mean. The repetition of a letter twice, lithography. Fine, this is just an instance of lithography. But for that same audience, if I start explaining lithography or repetition of, what did you think? I didn't go to grad school? Because you went to Princeton, or you think that you're talking, that you got to explain it to the guys from Rutgers or something? I mean, this is really, so in our crowd, whatever the crowd may be, we use the jargon of the crowd. So the hippies had their jargon, the textual scholars have their jargon, scientists have their jargon, and devotees have theirs. So you're working within a familiar group with a familiar language. But when you want to move out of that group, then that same language that created intimacy and familiarity and comfort creates strangeness. What are they talking about? And, is this for me or is this for some, it looks like it's not for outsiders or newcomers or something, all this stuff. So then you have to make decisions. First decision, who's my audience? And it can get complicated because you have overlapping audiences. And so then you have to consider, as you might do when speaking, that I have different people in the audience and I may have to explain something, or I may just avoid this terminology so that I can reach out more generally. You have to make some decisions there. And if you're going to an exclusively outside audience, then you're not going to use the inside jargon. Okay. Where am I? Then, so the language, fitting the audience. Then we look at the work. We're talking about whether a work is suitable, whether we're going to use it. Does it accomplish its purpose? If it's meant to be informative, is it informative? Or is it telling me things I already know? Or is it confusing where it should be informative? Does it deliver? If it's meant to be persuasive, are the arguments sound? We have lots of stuff with terrible logic. Are the arguments sound? Are the examples well chosen? Do the words do their job? A critical look at that way. I know why he's writing, I know what his purpose is. Does he achieve it? Or does it flop? Or with some cleaning up, can it work? There's some other questions. Is this the most suitable form or desire or structure for the work? Maybe this should have been a table. There's I looked at one of Lokanath Maharaj's books, and which he sent me a manuscript, and there was a chapter with all this information. This person, and I saw it was all tabular. There was the same information about, you know, Padayatra went here, Padayatra went there, Padayatra went here, this year and this year, this was the leader, this is the dates. You know, why do I want to read through all that text? Give me a table. Give me a table. So some things, the form or design or structure may not be the most suitable one. Maybe this should be not a book, but a series of pamphlets, or a series of individual publications on different topics that I can, you know, maybe that would be more effective, more economical perhaps, more affordable, you know, get more copies out. There's one publication I can think of where they wanted to have like a 32 or 48 page publication. It's got all this stuff in it about different topics from like different worlds concerning Krishna consciousness. And I looked at it and said, yeah, why? You know, and it's an expensive publication. It was, you know, why do you want to do that? Why don't you come out with, here's what we think about this, here's what we think about that, here's what we have to say about this, here's what we have to say about that. You know, a 2-pager, a 4-pager. You know, have 10 publications out of that. You're into science, great, here's something about science. You're into ecology, great, you have something to say about it. Why is this all, and you know, why in this publication? Who is this publication for? And how are you serving that readership or your purpose by putting this all together this way? Maybe it would be better split up. Maybe this would be better as a, what should I say? Picture book. No, maybe this could really be a great picture book. Maybe it could be, you know, think creatively. It could be all sorts of things. Series of posters. You know, who knows? So many ways to do things. Maybe it should be a newsletter. Then somebody gets it every day in their inbox. Why are you doing it this way? You could do it that way. A good example of a well-designed publication, Daya Shakti's little thoughts for the day things, those little calendars, what Prabhupada said on such and such day.
Yes.
You know, the form is just well thought out. The form and the purpose mesh together. If she put all that stuff together in a book, it wouldn't be nearly as effective as that little flip-over calendar. So, right? So you want to think about your form. Are the themes and ideas and descriptions developed in an orderly way, or is it chaotic? How much labor will be needed to get this work into print? Almost anything can be made printable, but, you know, is it worth it? Is it worth the trouble? Then you want to ask yourself other questions. How long will it come out to be? Am I looking at a 300-page book, a 100-page book, a 48-page pamphlet? Once you get down to closer analysis, there are multiples of pages that make sense if you're doing a pamphlet. 6 pages, 12 pages, 18 pages make sense. 19 pages does not make sense because of the way things are printed. Or 17 pages does not make sense. That's getting down to a close analysis. But first of all, you know, what am I looking at? How big is it going to be? Should it be illustrated? Maybe, maybe not. We sometimes have this impulse that everything should be illustrated, and sometimes the illustrations detract actually from your message. And sometimes the illustrations are what make the book go. So should it be illustrated? If it should be illustrated, how should it be illustrated? These are the things that start in the editor's mind. And then sometimes the editor's working with the designer, the editor gives it to the designer and says, here it is, and here are some ideas. Do you have any ideas about how the book should be sold? How it should be marketed? What audience? How we could get this out there? You're working with an author who wants to reach an audience or a publisher who wants to reach an audience. As the editor, you're in a good position to start thinking about how this book might be marketed. In the professional world, they definitely think about that because they have periodic conferences where they decide, first of all, not only what to publish, but what's going to be up front, what they're going to push. And the editors advocate for their titles. Here's one that I think is really going to make it. So then why? And how? Who's going to buy this book? How do we get to them? How do we reach them? We may know who they are, but then where do they live? How do we get to them? You might be thinking about these things. You might have suggestions about the design, about the front matter, about the back matter. Legal questions? A lot of people don't ask legal questions like, is it copyrighted? Do I have a right to print this material? Any of it? Or all of it? Or some of it? There are copyright laws. Sometimes they're enforced. Sometimes you can be sued, as people sometimes are. Copyright laws. Libel. If you're getting into areas of potential libel, you can read up on the law about it. There are books about it. You can't just say anything about anyone who's alive. You can libel the dead as much as you want. They can't sue. Any questions so far? Okay. Two kinds of editing. Mechanical and substantive. Mechanical editing involves matters of capitalization, hyphenation, grammar, punctuation, syntax, style. And style, by the way, here means editorial conventions. It doesn't mean like manner, like fashion. Among editors, style means the conventions that we follow. Our rivers are is river, when we speak of Ganges River, is river capital or lowercase? When we have a series of multiple items, is there a comma before the and? Or is there not? These are questions of style, which means the conventions that we follow. Either everybody follows these conventions, or our publishing house follows these conventions. That's called style. So these things are mechanical.
Does the BPT have a style sheet?
The BBT has a style book. We used to call it the style sheet until it got thick. BBT style guide. If you go to jswami.info, www.jswami.info, and look for the BBT style guide, or better yet, just Google BBT style guide, and that will take you to my website where you can download for free the BBT style guide, which I recommend. It has all sorts of guidance on all sorts of things that devotee publishers and editors will run into. And it represents the BBT's choices. You can also set your own. You don't have to agree with the BBT style on everything, but you'll see the decisions that the BBT has made and issues that we bring to your attention. Like the banyan tree, for example. What is a banyan tree? Is the banyan tree, well, Look in the BBT style guide and you'll find out everything about the banyan tree. And you'll see why these questions come into the editor's mind. We think we know what a banyan tree is. Yes?
Will that affect will that affect people, outside people who read our books?
Will affect outside people who read our books. The main rule of style is consistency. The main rule of style is consistency. If you're inconsistent, people may notice it, either consciously or unconsciously, without being able to say exactly what it is that's weird. But when they see that you sometimes have a word italics and lowercase, and sometimes it's Roman and uppercase, the same word used the same way, they may say, you know, like, what?
What is that?
Serial commas, no serial commas.
Exactly. When they see that you don't have a standard, then it's like, what's going on? They can, to a trained eye, they say, here's an amateur who doesn't really know what he's doing. For an untrained eye, they just may be a little puzzled. Why is this common word in italics or this and that? And also for you as an editor, not having a set of style guidelines makes your work harder. Because each time you run into an instance of whatever it is, you have to make the decision all over again. Is it Yamuna River capital R, or is it Yamuna River lowercase r? Is it Yamuna with a J or Yamuna with a Y? And if it's Jamunadasi, is it capital J or rather, is it a J or is it a Y? What's our style on Jamunadasi? Is Guru Das one word or two? Is Das capitalized or not? You know, all these decisions that you have to make over and over and over again. And each time maybe you'll make a different choice from other times. So having your style guide makes your life easy. Just look at it and say, okay, this is this. I should also mention, we have a BBT style guide, but one of the first things that the BBT style guide tells you is that we defer on most questions to the University of Chicago Manual of Style. University of Chicago Manual of Style. This is the style, there are many style guides. The Associated Press has their own, The Economist has their own style guide, Cambridge University Press. There's lots of style guides. The one most, almost universally used in America by North American publishers is the University of Chicago Manual of Style. Excuse me?
For book editing, mainly.
Book editing?
AP and New York Times.
Oh, yeah, but even then, New York Times and Washington Post, they have their own style guides. But publishers in general, including newspaper publishers, if they're not using some other newspaper style guide, they look to Chicago, especially book editors. I mentioned in some website that we generally follow Chicago, and some critics say, yeah, they're following some rock band. Anyway, it's the Chicago, it's umpteenth edition. You can look online and see what the latest one is. If you want to save some money, you can get it. The best recent edition, not be too far off, but it's usually worth seeing what the latest one has to say. And it answers innumerable questions. It answers questions about all sorts of English things. It has a good section of legal stuff. It has all sorts of guidelines about headlines and front matter and back matter and indexes and bibliographies and footnotes. Like, do we use numbers? Do we use this? Do we use that? Millions of questions answered in the Chicago Manual of Style. And what the BBT Style Guide does is that it takes questions usually not dealt with in Chicago like how do we present Prabhupada's title, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness? How do we present ISKCON? You see in ISKCON publications, what else do you see? You see also ISKCON done every which way. And, you know, 3 dots with, that's an initial capital followed by lowercase letters. Then, anyway, if you look in our style guide, you'll find out how to do it. You'll find out how to spell Tompkins Square Park. You'll find out whether Devanagari should be lowercase or uppercase, and whether it should be Roman or italic. And you'll find out when to capitalize he or she, when to capitalize who, the answer being never. Except at the beginning of the sentence.
Does it address specific Sanskrit diacritics?
Yeah?
Because I know
Critical questions are there.
Chicago does not.
Do we say Shivite or Shaivite? All sorts of things you wouldn't expect to find in Chicago are found in the DVT style guide. And stuff that is in Chicago, we either say nothing, because you can look in Chicago, or we say we follow Chicago, or what have you. So it amplifies or adds to what's in Chicago. These 2 style guides will take you far. There's also, by the way, I believe Cambridge University Press has a style guide. It's called something, Cambridge Guide for Editors and Compositors or something. There's an Oxford University Press style guide. So those who are editing for countries outside of America and Canada, or even outside of America, you might want to choose one of the British style guides, so you know what you meant. Like, for example, for commas and for punctuation, British and America disagree.
Oxford.
Not the Oxford comma, but Hare Krishna, she said, in Great Britain, we have single quotation marks.
In Chicago, yeah, it's different.
And in North America, we would have double.
Right.
So there's all sorts of stuff, I won't go into more of it. There's all sorts of stuff where the conventions are different in the UK and Commonwealth countries from what we find in America. Even then, the most important principle is stick to one style. Because even if you stick to American style and publish your book in Britain or India, people will see that you're being consistent as American.
Are books that are published in the UK, or do they use British English?
Yeah.
They do, okay.
Yeah. If you're a UK publisher, generally you'll follow British style unless you have a reason not to.
So they use
The Brits are starting to edge over to the Yankee side by sheer brute force of American power and influence. So much literature comes out, technical writing and everything else comes out of America. But the conventions are different, and the British do prefer their own,
Surprised.
including spelling and so on.
I wanted to ask regarding this British English and American English. Does this have because we will write in English for the whole world, not just for Americans.
We write English for the whole world. Is there an ISKCON decision on the matter?
Or
Do we write in British or American? There is. So far, the governing body commission has not met and resolved this question, fortunately.
It's a regional information.
Pardon me. No, there's no rule. You go by your own best judgment. If your publication is going to be used, is meant especially for circulation in a British area, you may choose to follow British style. You might just choose, like I might just choose to follow American style simply because I know I can do it.
Someone else can.
You know, if I go for British, that's not second nature to me. Where's that again? Where's the common goal here? Inside or outside? So I may just say, okay, I'm going to edit it American and let them live with it. You know, I'm American and that's that.
sometimes in spelling is changing.
Spelling and so on. And it's also an economic question, you know. Like my book is published simultaneously in America and South Africa. South Africa tends to follow British conventions. But the trouble involved, thank you. The trouble involved in producing 2 editions isn't worth the trouble. So American standards are perfectly intelligible in South Africa. That's not what a South African would do. But they can certainly read it, understand it, and forgive it.
So you would suggest more like, because I imagine if you want to really start editing seriously, you have to become quite proficient in one style.
In one. And be aware of the other, but yes, you'd probably want to learn the conventions of one style and be well versed in them. There are books, like the Harry Potter books, that are produced in such huge quantities on both sides of the Atlantic, and are published with slightly different text. They change the spelling in
The title.
I don't think the titles, but
Yeah, Sorcerer's Stone.
oh, even titles.
They changed the
The
Sorcerer's
Sorcerer's Stone and then the
Philosopher's
Philosopher's Stone.
Because I thought the American audience would.
And you know, a car in the American version would have a trunk, not a boot,
Yeah, right.
and a windshield instead of a windscreen, and they'd be eating sweets instead of, in America they'd be eating candy, and in England they'd be eating sweets. So, yeah, these are the kind of, anything else on style sheets? Yeah, so you can download the BBT style guide, and if you have questions also, or things you think should be added, feel free to get in touch with me about that, because we're always expanding.
There's one question on Sanskrit transliteration. So sometimes we use Sanskrit dialects and in some books, Sanskrit dialects.
Yes.
So some books it is used, sometimes it is not used.
Sometimes used, sometimes not used. You have to decide. For our BBT literature, Prabhupada said our standard should be always diacritics. He said we're not going to come to their standard, we're going to bring them to our standard. So that's why you find in all BBT books, we use we use the diacritic system. Now, elsewhere, you have to make a decision. I made a decision for my book to spell Krishna out, and everything else is according to the strict system. But I'm consistent. It's not Krishna spelled out someplace and the diacritic marks elsewhere. Anything else? Yes.
This is all still under the category of mechanical editing.
This is mechanical editing, yes. Substantive, your methods will, your considerations are different. That's what we talked about earlier. You know, does it make it at all? And then once we say yes, it makes it, then you get into, you know, larger sort of questions. This chapter should be thrown out. This chapter actually belongs before that chapter. we need another something or other before this, because the reader will be disoriented unless we have a chapter that explains this to him first. We don't need this over here because that's superfluous. All of these kinds of questions. How much should go in this book? Just how much? What's the scope of the book? I know one book that started with a very clear purpose, very sort of short, sweet, distinct, and someone else got involved with it and it bloated. It had what they call scope creep. Pretty soon you got everything, everybody and their grandmother was in there. It would have benefited by a substantive editor going in there and saying, listen, don't need this, don't need this, don't need this, don't need that. If it were a novel, you get into questions of plot and character development, and that all comes under substantive editing. You're giving too much away over here, and this character is underdeveloped, and this scene is not convincing, and that's all in substantive editing. In nonfiction, it comes to the progress of the arguments, the sequence of the points presented, the design of the thing. Are we going to go chronologically? Are we going to go geographically? Are we going to go in order of importance? All sorts of ways of organizing something. So that's substantive editing also. Certainly philosophy. So the larger scale questions, the questions about the work as a whole and parts of the work, come under substantive editing. Larger sorts of questions about the substance of the book and its parts. Yes?
Is this mechanical editing equal to proofreading, or is
No.
proofreading just...
Editing and proofreading are two different functions, although proofreaders sometimes don't know it.
Comes after proofs.
Proofreaders, the job of a proofreader is to make sure that the text prepared, the final text prepared, matches the manuscript. That's the strict function of the publisher, of the proofreader. In fact, when you may have seen, there's a movie where I'm reading, one of Jayadvaita's films, I'm reading the text of a book into a tape recorder. You've seen that maybe? What I'm doing, and we picked this up from a university press, I'm reading the text into the tape recorder with all the punctuations. Krishna went to the Jamuna Kapar river, and there he saw Balaram, the holder of the plow, along with his stuff. So I'm reading the whole thing exactly as it should appear, with every punctuation mark, so that the proofreaders then listen to the tape, look at the text, and see, does it match? Before that, we were doing it with two people. This is the old way. Two people sit there. One's got the manuscript, one's got the final, and they're reading exactly that way. But we picked up from Princeton University Press the system using tape recorder. That's what a proofreader does. Now, may look at it and say, I just couldn't let this go by. It matches the manuscript. This is crazy. Or whatever. But when proofreaders start to become editors, then you have a problem. Or maybe you have an opportunity. Maybe they should be promoted and become an editor. But when you have the two functions wrapped up in one, you can get a real mess. And in some BBT books, we have some things that are like seriously wrong. We're still trying to find all the instances of them and fix them, where a proofreader had a better idea and messed something up.
From a financial standpoint, proofreader, it should already be in a very good state before the proofreader comes in. With his
Yeah, proofreaders should be reading pretty much the
style
final.
set and
Yeah, everything should be, you're looking for typographical errors, you're looking for a line left out, skipped a line, you're looking for something that's set in the wrong font, you're looking for technical errors at this point. You shouldn't be, questions of plot, questions of, that shouldn't be there. Even factual questions shouldn't be there. It really should be, does it match? By the way, a lot of things have changed because of the way books are produced now. It used to be that the writer handed in a handwritten or typed manuscript and gave it to the publisher. Now everything's going straight from Microsoft Word to a PDF file and printed. So that changes a lot of things. Maybe we won't go into all of that right now, but it presents interesting issues along the way. Am I going till 4:30?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Are we good? Good, we try to be good. Yes?
I just have a question. In our PMC.
Microphone.
I just have a short question. In our BBT group, some of us have some professional experience with either translating or anything, but most of us are just, learning along the way. So what you just mentioned is one of the biggest issues in the group, I think, because we tend to, the easiest way to finalize the book is to, consider everyone's input. And then everyone's input. We have a translator who does quite a good job, but then we have an editor and a proofreader. And all of us are, somehow helping.
Yeah.
And if somebody says, no, you're just a proofreader, but there are still issues in the book.
Yeah. Now, I just described what the role of the proofreader is in terms of his actual job description. But beyond that, if the proofreader as a member of your team wants to go to the editor and query something, that's fine. That's really fine, just as long as the proofreader doesn't take over. Use his or her editorial better judgment and fix something that the editor didn't want fixed. Or even that the author didn't want fixed sometimes. I had one article I submitted to Back to Godhead in which I mentioned the footprint of Lord Vishnu at Gaya. And the editor fixed it to the footprints of Lord Vishnu at Gaya. There's only one. So on such questions, the editor might be better advised to query the author. The way they used to do this in the manuscript days is that you would have like a little slip of paper which you would attach in the relevant place and fold over, and your note would be there, and your writer or whichever member of your team it was could reply to it, and you pass these manuscripts back and forth with the notes. These days, it's the review function of Microsoft Word. Everyone's familiar with the review function of Word, with tracking and comments. Comments and comments upon comments and comments upon comments. So tracking, comments, versions. I don't have to tell you about backups. I'm sure I'm going to do that. Do I?
3 times.
Okay. As an editor, you have various methods at your disposal. One is rethinking. Rethinking, looking at something, as we said, could this be done a better way? Do we need this? Could it be done more effectively? Rethinking. And other is cutting. There they all are. Rethinking, cutting, rearranging, rewording, polishing. Perhaps this is an order of refinement. Rethinking being the sort of larger scale, polishing, finer touches. Get ready for a favorite quote. Writing improves in direct ratio to the number of things we can keep out of it.
Concision.
There's so much superfluous stuff that can enter into any piece of writing. The more we can keep that stuff out of it, the better the writing gets. The puffery, the needless repetition, the displays of brilliance, otherwise known as false ego. So much junk. I adapted this for kirtan also. It said that kirtan improves in direct ratio to the number of things we can keep out. Again, this is the opposite of the creative function. This is now the critical function. Yes. Cut sections. Cut chapters. Cut whole chapters, cut sections, cut, large-scale pieces of stuff that don't contribute anything, that get in the way, or could perhaps be left for a different book. And you can get down, cut pages. We'll keep the chapter, but we'll start cutting pages. Cut from the beginning. This is a technique I use a lot as an editor. Put your pen, if it's a manuscript, on the upper left-hand side and start drawing a line somewhat diagonally down. Until you get to the point where the actual text begins. So much of what's submitted is warm-up. Like a person who gets up and says, well, wasn't quite sure when they invited me today what I was going to say. And, while I was at the airport, I started thinking about it, and then an idea came to me, and I started thinking that really Trump should be thrown out of office. Well, that's where your article begins, not back at the airport. And it's amazing how much an article can improve by starting at the beginning and just tossing out until you get to real stuff. For those who want to see ruthless editors at work, there's a facsimile version of The Wasteland, which is of course a classic work of T.S. Eliot, a great poem of the modern age, which was edited by, or had many editorial suggestions, essentially edited by Ezra Pound. And in the facsimile edition, you see pages and pages and pages of brilliant writing being just deleted. Just deleted. Of course, it takes one to know one. He was qualified to do it. But so much writing can be benefited just by cutting severely from the beginning. The counterpart is to cut from the end. My mom wrote a book, not for the market. She wrote a couple of books actually, And in one chapter, she wrote something, and then she reached the end of what she wanted to say, and then she elaborated on it. I said, Mom, stop here. You know, they'll get it. Just stop. So, cutting from the end of the article, or sometimes the end of the paragraph, or what have you. Cutting there, knowing when to stop. Sometimes we find that also a lecture, and it reaches its end, and the person keeps talking. Have you just stopped? So we're cutting from the end. Then you can cut paragraphs, sentences, words. And yes, it comes to syllables. Cut, 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 and cut ruthlessly. Does it add something? Does it move the piece forward? Does it serve a purpose? If not, why is it there? Cut, 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 cut. One author, I believe it was, I don't think it was an editor, author, perhaps an editor, he advised that you murder your darlings. What that means is that when you've written something that you think is particularly brilliant, then it's probably a prime candidate for deletion. Don't be afraid to edit out something you're intensely attached to or you think is really great. Cut cliches. Everyone knows what a cliche is? Anyone not know what a cliche is? Okay, cliche is a stereotyped expression, a worn out word or expression, especially expression. It was really great and striking the first time someone used it, and now it's just like an old horse, you know, it's worn out. Like workaholic, you know, it was really cool when the first author coined it. Now it's just dull. There's nothing striking about it. We have a list. Let's go to it. I'll give you a good idea what cliches are. Acutely aware. You're not just aware, you're acutely aware. How many times? Who's never heard acutely aware? Who's heard it more than 100 times? Okay. Acutely aware, to all intents and purposes, the annals of history. Let's see. Basic reasons. Beat a history retreat. Bewildering variety. Beyond the shadow of doubt. Fight the dust, bitter strife, blazing holocaust. Bleak picture, bleak shadow. Burning issue, brink of disaster, ripe, blissfully unaware, blissful ignorance, blind prejudice, blessing in disguise. Calm before the storm, checks and balances, cherished belief, colorful scene, conspicuous by its absence. Crippling effects, cruel death. Daunting task, day-to-day life, day-to-day existing, dazzling array. Death may strike at any moment. Desperately groping, dire need, dire predictions, dread disease, dream come true, doomed to failure. Oh, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. See that a lot in this kind of, like some of these rediscovered Kipling. The fertile soil of, final chapter, first and foremost, fleeting happiness, fleeting pleasures, fleeting visions. The general public, graphic description. Grueling ordeal. Hopelessly inadequate. and so on. These are all, what these expressions share is that we've all heard them before, again and again and again. And they've lost their color, they've lost their brightness, they've lost their bite. They're just old.
Can jargon become like this?
Can jargon become like this? Yeah, jargon becomes worn out also.
Like nectarian?
Nectarian after a while, yeah. Oh, like, it was like blissful, like bliss itself is like so 1960s. Follow your bliss and all of that. This is like dated. Hmm?
Nice.
Nice, yeah, nice is not exactly a cliche, it's just an overworn word. Nice.
I just think within our own jargon.
Yeah,
you know.
nice.
It's nice.
Would you say it's your karma is a platitude or a cliche? And is there a difference?
Excuse me?
The saying it's your karma, just it's your karma.
It's your karma.
It's your karma?
Oh, it's your karma? Oh.
I don't know if it would be a cliche. Yeah, there are like whole answers that are cliches, like,
You're not body proof.
yeah, they tend to reach cliche status. And especially, they can share that territory of being unthinking. Somebody's really in distress and you say, well, it's your karma, Prabhu.
Yeah.
That might not be the most appropriate answer.
Or helpful.
Or helpful answer. I don't know that it comes exactly under cliche, but it shares some territory with cliche, yes. Yeah, a character in a novel might be laughable for, just sort of giving canned answers like that. Whatever the situation says, well, it's your karma, Prabhu. It's like a cartoon character, well, it's your karma.
Great.
Okay. This is your initiation ceremony. That is to say, this is a story that every editor will learn. About an editor who was walking to work every day, and he would pass a fish store, and he saw this sign, fresh fish sold here. So being an editor, he thought that, well, there's really no need for fresh. Because, they're not going to be selling stale fish. So, fish sold here. So he told the store owner, and the store owner fixed it, fish sold here. So now he was happy, this is better. But then he looked at sold and thought, what, are they going to be giving it away or something? No one really thinks that.
Fish.
And so then he finally got it down to fish here.
Oh.
And then he thought, well, where else would it be? The sign is there, and it's enough just to have the sign say fish. And then after that, he thought, there's no need of fish because you can smell it from a mile away. So this is what editors do. They look to save a word. Gopi Pranadana Prabhu told me that among Sanskrit scholars, if they can save a syllable, they feel that they've conquered. I forget exactly what it is.
Putrotsava, like having a child. So.
Like having a child, yeah. Thank you. So if they save a syllable, it's like having a child. It's such a celebration. So editors are like that. Why have more words than you need to cover the territory, to get the point across? to be and which are great candidates for cutting. Which are, which were, can be cut. Often, not always, but often they can be cut with no loss. I consider the idea impossible. To be adds nothing.
Consider the idea impossible. It's the same without.
It's the same. So you have two words added for no gain. Several of the proposals which were presented before the GBC. Do you lose anything with which were? They can just go straight out, right? Several of the proposals presented before the GBC, does that work equally well?
Doesn't it have to have several of the proposals words?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is not a full sentence.
Yeah, but it's not a full sentence.
But this is full sentence. Several of the proposals which were presented before the GBC concerned child protection. You can just as well do without which were, for saving of two words. Essential truth which is stated concisely is true eloquence. It's truer eloquence without which it's. And you gain strength and power in your writing by cutting. Writers and authors typically count words. I consider the idea to be impossible. How many words? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I cut 2, I'm down to 5. I don't know what that is as a percentage. Yeah. I saved 28% just by getting rid of 2B.
You can save so many pages, and you could the book's so much cheaper.
Yeah, it's not just a financial question, but the reader has to go through this.
Right.
I have to process 28% more words for nothing, for no gain, for no purpose, no added force, no added clarity, no added delight, just more words, 28% more. Several of the proposals which were presented before the GBC, 10. Cut 2 and I saved 20%. This is how editors, in Microsoft Word there's a counting function, you're all familiar with that? You can count everything in the text, you can highlight a section and count, and editors do this. Especially, as you're learning, you count your words and you look and say, I can save 20%, I can save 2 words, can I save more? And you look, and there are ways to save more. These are this is sort of an easy win to be in which are, we can just. We learned this from Sheridan Baker, the author of The Complete Stylist, who Setzer Martin at the University of Wisconsin or something. He looked at one of our BTG articles, thought it was pretty good in terms of the way it was done, but he pointed out this opportunity for saving space. I have more, but I wonder whether, since we have 2 minutes only, you might have any questions or thoughts here. Is that a question or a thought? Yes?
Maharaj, are we recommended to write proses? Are we recommended to write proses?
Are we recommended to write
Proses.
Prose?
Prose.
prose?
Stories?
Prose in a poetry form in between the articles.
Are we recommended to write prose in poetry form? I'm not quite, could
She
you?
means
Like something which is rhyming.
Oh, poetry.
Is poetry recommended?
Like alliteration and things like that.
Poetry has its place. Poetry has its place. Poetry, Prabhupada wrote poetry. Vaishnavas are known as poetic, which doesn't necessarily mean one has to use the poem form. Poetry, of course, in Sanskrit, it has to have strict meter. It has to meet a lot of qualifications. In modern English, they're less particular about it. But there are rules which you either follow or break. Poetry is allowed. Poetry is encouraged. Prabhupada liked some devotee-written poetry. It's good if you're writing poetry to have some sense of what poetry is about. There's some, and yeah, I guess to answer your question, poetry is all right. To edit poetry requires special skills. You have to be sensitive to what poetry is about. Maybe I won't say much more about poetry. It has its place. Does that answer your question? Okay. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.